want to take this opportunity to talk about a problem which I have met many times in the last 20 years. We have people going off. Every community in the world, including Gateshead and including Mea Shearim and Spring Valley and Muncie and Williamsburg, every community in the world has people going off. And there's a wide variety of reasons. But one thing that can't be said anymore is that these are the ignorant ones, or the ones who haven't learned. We just heard last week about someone who learned 10 years in yeshiva and went off. Took his whole family and went off. So there can be emotional problems and there can be physical problems, but it's not a problem of the ideas. These are not people who never went to yeshiva but understood or made the investment. And I think that there's a way of handling such problems, or when they start, which could very much increase the probability of having a happy outcome. So I've put this together on my blog also, but I handed it out, and I hope that you'll share it with people because I think it can help. I want to take you through it, and then I'll give you an example. What often happens is the one who wants to go off needs an excuse. He can't just say it's taiva. So he looks for an intellectually respectable excuse. And that could be something in science, the various sciences, hard sciences, social sciences, psychology, or something in philosophy, or something in history. And he most likely watches some videos on the internet. 30 years ago I would have said ready to read some books, but that's out of date. And he picks up some terminology, some jargon, and he's quite aware that his parents have never heard of this subject before and no clue what the jargon means. And he comes home and he stops keeping Shabbos, and he stops keeping kashrus, and when his parents express dismay and often they're angry and they're condemnatory, he says, "You're just ignorant. You don't know about the superego of Freud. See, if you knew about Freud, then you'd understand why you're living in the Middle Ages and you don't understand what the real world is about." Or low temperature superconductivity and electricity. Or Hawking radiation for black holes. Or, as one student here in Yerushalayim had the audacity to quote Gödel's theorem, which is the most famous theorem in mathematical logic of the 20th century, as his reason for going off. And when his father sent it to me, I said, "Come, let's talk about it." I wrote my PhD thesis on that theorem. So we spoke about it for an hour, and it became clear that it has absolutely nothing to do with leaving Yiddishkeit. The real reason is cheeseburgers and other things like that. So I said, why don't you be honest? Admit that you like cheeseburgers. Don't pretend. Don't push it on Kurt Gödel in 1931. So the student has read these things superficially or heard videos about them, watched videos about them, and he spouts this meaningless jargon to his parents, and his parents are upset. They're defensive. By the way, every parent who has contacted me about a child, they all have one thought in common. My child is brilliant. I don't know whether that's how they save face. He's eating cheeseburgers and he's leading Yiddishkeit, he's leading the family. At least he's smart. He sounds smart because he's confronting them with ideas and concepts and terminology with which they're totally unfamiliar. That's no way to judge whether a person is smart or not. So the parent or the educator reacts with anger or with dismissiveness or with an attack on the person's character. That just reinforces his understanding that you people don't want to deal with my reality and you have nothing to say to the issue, so therefore you're just coming down hard on me. It's called an ad hominem argument. You're destroying me rather than responding to the issue. And that just reinforces his sense that what he's doing is obviously intellectually correct. So I have a suggestion how to handle these matters, which I think in the vast majority of cases will be successful. First of all, always treat the child with respect. When he presents to you these ideas, the reaction should be calm. If you have to take a Lorivan beforehand, take a Lorivan. It's worth it. You should be able to remain calm, thoughtful, receptive, non-judgmental, both of the child's character, for sure, that's ad hominem, that's an attack on the person rather than dealing with the subject, and not an attack on the material either. Don't attack anything. Say to the child, I'm very glad that you're sharing this with me, and I really want to understand you. I want to understand what you think and why you're doing what you're doing. And I wish you would explain to me some of the things you said because they're not familiar to me. I don't know what the superego is. Could you explain it to me so I'll be able to understand you? That simple request, explain to me the terminology or explain to me the principles that you're using, will defeat 50% of the attacks. Because he doesn't know what he's talking about. He hasn't got a clue. He read it, he got some sound bites, he got it from the people who are dragging our children away by presenting them a veneer. And you ask him, well, what does it mean? Can you tell me the meaning of the concept? Can you tell me its background? And he'll start to fumble and not be able to answer. And then the thing to say is, gee, I really do want to understand you. I do really want to be able to communicate with you. Please get a better understanding and come back to me. Don't be afraid you're pushing him back to the apicursus. That's the way to wean him from it. First of all, let him realize he doesn't know what he's talking about. He hasn't got a clue. And he's been sucked in to pledge allegiance without any understanding at all. He's the intellectual. He's the clever one. He's looking for the truth. And he doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay. So he goes back, and he comes back with a better presentation. This time, he can explain what the concepts are. Then you say, okay, I'm beginning to understand the concepts that you're working with. How did you arrive at the conclusion that they're true? You know, chess is a game with concepts also, but it doesn't deal with real life. You're telling me that because there's such a thing as the superego, therefore there was no Torah at Sinai. How do you get from one to the other? How do you make the bridge? Another 20%, 25% of the time, you won't be able to make the bridge. Give him the same option. Let me understand you, get it clear, articulate it so that I can understand it. I'm happy to speak to you whenever you have more to tell me. Please tell me so I understand what you're doing. That's already 75% who have been serviced that way. 25% of the time, the child will come back, Spinoza. There is a professor of philosophy at the University of the United States who's a Shana Operishnik. He used to be frum, he's not frum anymore. And he uses Spinoza to push off his students from Yiddishkeit. Frum kids go to that school, and they take his class, and he says, because of Spinoza, you shouldn't be frum. I talked to one of those students. He couldn't spell Spinoza's name. He just heard the professor and heard what sounded to be like very clever arguments. He couldn't repeat any of them. He couldn't articulate any of them. I said to him, did you ever look up critique of Spinoza? You can do that with Google. It's not hard. Just put in critique of Spinoza. 24 websites come up. No, he had not read any critiques, nothing. Just heard the babble from the professor and then decided to start eating cheeseburgers. You're supposed to be the intelligent one. You're supposed to be the clever one. So, say to him, when he comes up with something that's articulate, the next thing to ask him is, does everyone agree with this? You're giving me a picture. I begin to understand the picture. I see how it hangs together. Does everyone agree with this picture? If he says yes, say to him, thanks. I'm glad to hear that. And then you do a little Googling or get somebody who knows. The next time you meet him, you say, gee, I seem to, maybe I'm making a mistake, but I seem to have found people who do disagree with this picture. It's not exactly universal that everybody accepts it. Better is that he should do the Googling and he should find out for himself. He's been sold a bill of goods. They haven't been told him that it's a controversial issue. And in all of these cases, to preserve friendliness, openness, non-judgmental, you just want to understand. I want to understand what you think, what you believe, where you're coming from, what your values are. and let his attempt to articulate it to you reveal to himself that there's really nothing there. If in the end he gives you a comprehensive picture, it's well articulated, the concepts are defined, the argument is laid out, he tells you what the basis for it is, you say to him, thank you, I appreciate this, I love you, and I want to communicate with you, let me think about it. And then email one of us, and we'll give you the information, the ability to tear it down. Just for your own perspective. One thing that these people all have in common is that they haven't emailed us. Why not? I was a professor of philosophy, and my teacher and very close friend, Rabbi Moshe Meisman, has a PhD from MIT in mathematics and taught mathematics in university. And there are people who are historians and archaeologists. There are experts in every field who are frum. And you're looking for the truth. Wouldn't you email one of them and ask them about your clever arguments? One fellow I heard about last week wrote a 40-page manifesto. And he says, I've heard of Gottlieb, and he's smart, but Dawkins is smart also, and I choose to follow Dawkins. But he never communicated with me to find out what I would say about Dawkins. And Dawkins never said anything about me because he knows nothing about Yiddishkeit. He knows nothing about philosophy. He knows nothing about Christianity. You've heard of Dawkins? There's a false image here. Do you know what his position at Oxford was? He had a chair in the public understanding of science. He never was a scientist. He's a communicator. He's taken as the authority. Excuse me, he's not even trained in it. But he defends himself by saying, there are two very smart people, I choose to follow this one. It's not a question of being smart. Number one, it's a question of speaking in your field. The minute a person steps outside of his field, then he's not trustworthy. And that applies on our side as well. If you are going to present, if a Rav is going to present an argument against science, he'd better know his science. Not just say that they're silly and superstitious and foolish and they have to make up their minds. Better know his science, or better know who to quote. And certainly they know no philosophy and no religion, not even Christianity, which is their religion, let alone Haftel, Yiddishkeit. So, who do you want to speak to? Someone who knows both sides, or someone who only knows one side? And I have a PhD in philosophy, mathematical logic, and I know some Torah. Dawkins knows absolutely nothing about religion or philosophy at all. Are the two sources of equal reliability? But the fellow never emailed me, never made the investigation. So it shows that he's not really looking for the truth. He's looking for an excuse. But our job is not to alienate him as a person, to show interest, to show concern, and depending upon the relationship, to show love, and to want to be able to understand. In your wanting to understand, he will have to struggle with his own understanding. And he'll have to confront the fact that he doesn't have an understanding to share, because he really doesn't understand it. Now, as I said, I've received these challenges from parents who have already given up. One fellow who went to that University of the United States, I corresponded with his parents and some with him, and he decided to come and do battle. He came with a supporter, and he brought with him a stack of philosophy books. They booked into a hotel, and they had, I forget how many hours it was a day, for 4 days in a row. And after each day, he ran back to the hotel and looked up in the philosophy books what he could find here and what he could find there. He was desperate. Okay, his parents put the money into the trip. I don't know what happened in the end, because a lot of these have emotional core. If they have an emotional core, then often it won't work. But when the person's putting on that philosophic, that intellectual veneer, and he's pretending that he has something to say, I recommend this as the method of dealing with him. It will save cases where a right attitude would have been enough to change the course that the person has seemed to choose. Now let me give you a couple of examples in concrete how this works. I'm eating cheeseburgers because science has proved that the world is 13.8 billion years old. And you tell me that it's 5779, out of reach. You know, you're completely out of question. It's a big gap between 5779 and 13.8 billion. You know, a number of zeros in particular. And science has proved that. So you've got to be wrong. And since you're wrong, I'm checking out. So start by asking him, how has science proved it? What is the proof that they offer? 50% of the time you won't have a clue. You just read it, that's all. But then he may say, well, there are things happening in the world, and they happen at a certain speed. And you can see how much has happened, and then you can tell by the speed how long it's taken. Stars are billions of miles away from us, so if the light traveled to us by the speed of light, it has to take millions of years. Radioactive elements decay, that's where radioactivity comes from, and we know what it's like when it's pure, and now it's 50% deteriorated, and we know how long it takes to deteriorate 50%, so we can calculate it. If it takes 12 million years to deteriorate 50%, and just go on 50%, it's 12 million years when it started, so that's 12 million years. I want you to know that the Rambam faced this problem in a much more extreme form. We have 13.8 billion against 5779. He had infinity, because the whole of the educated world, all the scientists and all the philosophers until 1965 believed the world has no beginning at all. It's always been here, always, and always will be. Has no beginning and no end, infinite in both directions. Infinity is bigger than 13.8 billion, a lot bigger, infinitely bigger. And the Rambam wrote an explicit answer to this question in the Morah, Chelik Beis, Perek Yud Zayin, which I'm going to tell to you, and then I'll show you how it applies here as well. Rambam said, I want you to imagine a baby boy that's born, and a few months after birth, his father takes him to a colony where there are only men. The boy grows up. At some point, he asks his father, where did we come from? We people in this colony, where did we come from? So his father says to him, well, there are others who are very much like us, but different in some respects. Every one of us starts out as a tiny miniature inside the abdomen of one of them. And we're inside the abdomen of the other for 9 months, and then we exit, and then we grow to be the way you see us here. So the child says, we're inside the abdomen of another human being. When we're in there, can we breathe? Can we eat? Can we drink? And of course the answers are no. So then the child says, well then, what you're telling me can't be true. You all know, as I know, that if you don't breathe for 4 minutes, you're dead. If you don't drink for 2 months, you're dead. If you don't eat for 6 months, you're dead. You're telling me that we are miniatures inside the abdomen of those others for 9 months without breathing, eating, or drinking? You have to be lying. It can't be true. Now says the Rambam, given what that child sees of the world, he's right. Because he's observing the life of a person after birth. A life of a person after birth depends upon breathing, eating, and drinking. Without that, for an extended period of time, you're going to be dead. But the truth is that when you're in the womb, in gestation, in pregnancy, the fundamentals of life are entirely different. They're entirely different. You're attached by an umbilical cord, and that umbilical cord provides the fetus with nutrients and oxygen. Doesn't need to eat, drink, and breathe. So, the failure in the child's objection is he's starting with a world that he observes, and he's generalizing it and saying, this world is all there is. And if this world is all there is, and it's always been this way, then the story you're telling me can't be true. What's the answer? The answer is it wasn't always that way. Rabbi Tatz has a beautiful presentation. He says there are over 20 features of a fetus, which, if it were outside the womb, would kill it in minutes. What happens at birth is all 20 of those features reverse themselves, and in a matter of a couple of minutes, It's a brand new organism functioning in a brand new way, and it lives. The fact that you survived birth is a miracle. The blood is going the wrong way in the heart, and some of the arteries aren't open, and the lungs are tiny nubs which have to unfold and open and start to work. Hemoglobin, the hemoglobin molecule changes its form. It's not the same form in the fetus as after birth. The birth trauma triggers a new chemical formation, and the molecule changes. So, it's a different form of existence. And the failure of the child is to take what he sees in his colony and assume that it's always been that way. Says Maimonides, the first 6 days, up until the end of Sheshis Yemei Bereshis, is the gestation of the world. It's where the world is in the womb of creation, and the laws of nature that we see operating now, we're not operating then in the same way. It's not that there's no overlap, but there's a gigantic discontinuity between them. Now, everything the scientist says to project 13.8 billion or infinity is based on an assumption. The assumption is that the way you see the world operating now, that's the way it's always been operating. But you see, you can't go back 1 billion years or 1 million years or 10,000 years to check whether 10,000 years ago the world really was operating then the way it is operating today. You just have to assume that it's always been operating that way. Now, if you assume it's been operating that way, you can draw your conclusion. Just like the child draws the conclusion that the story of pregnancy is false because we'd be dead. But the minute you question that assumption, you realize you don't have a proof. What you've done is to make an assumption, what's called the uniformity of nature, and you apply it and say, assume everything's always been the same. What do we get? You get 13.8 billion, but it's based on an assumption. Something that's based on a free assumption isn't a proof. It's just working out where you're starting from. You've decided to start from there, and then you draw your conclusion. I don't have to roll over and play dead because you made an assumption and drew a conclusion from an assumption. The light's been traveling for billions of years because they're billions of light years away. You only know they're billions of light years away because you assume that all the processes have been the same, otherwise they wouldn't be that far away either. Or that the speed of light has been the same the whole time. You don't know that either. So, the child says that science has proved it. Try this counter response on it, or if you can't do it yourself. We had a boy here last week, the week before, who got his BA from the University of Texas in mathematics, and the University of Texas is very good in math and science. And he had this question, and I did it in front of Orla Gola, the Talmidim were there, and we argued it out for an hour, and he realized that he has no way to counter this argument. There's nothing to say. Well, it's the Rambam's argument, so chances are he's not going to be able to answer it. So, if the child talks about the 13.8 billion years, either you tell him, I'll get you an answer, or if you can learn as much as I said, give it to him, and you'll be able to say to him, I hear what you're saying, but it seems to me that it has this weakness, and challenge him. Maybe you can find me someone who will teach us how to overcome this weakness. Challenge him. Let him go back to the internet. Let him email his professors. I'm not asking shadows for you. Of course, you ask your Rav for what you should do, but I'm talking about the strategy. He'll email his professors, as I've given challenges for the last 20 years to my students. Write your professors and get me an answer. I know the literature, so they know they can't get me an answer. There isn't an answer in the literature.